Today I'm joined by David Whittaker. David is the CEO of Keystone Property Finance, which is a dedicated buy-to-let lender driven to deliver the highest level of service and solutions to both their brokers and their customers. So, hi David.
Simon, lovely to join you today.
No, thank you for joining us. So David, look, for anyone who doesn't know Keystone Property Finance, how would you describe what you do, who you do it for, but also, probably most importantly, what makes you different?
So Keystone is a non-bank mortgage lender. And as you alluded to in your opening statement there, Simon, we serve the landlord community, whether they are large, small, in a limited company in their own name, buying houses or flats or what we now call houses in multiple occupation, or small blocks of flats. An underserved community, and sadly, a community that seems to attract the irritation and ire of successive governments of all stripes, which is bizarre because the private rental sector grows largely at the inability or unwillingness of the state to provide social housing, as I certainly knew as a very young boy. Simon, you're far too young for that, but long has gone the day where you would expect your county council or your borough council to have a large stock of community housing of a good standard. And the private rental sector has stepped in to fill that gap. But bless them, they get coshed at every turn by successive governments, whether it's taxation or legislation. And we serve them, but as you rightly said at the beginning, we only work through brokers. So customers are brought to us by brokers where we provide the solution that works best. May not always be price, maybe on service delivery, or understanding that those customers have built a business that is a bit too complicated for some of the mainstream banks.
Yeah.
They've dared to be in a limited company, or they've got a partnership with a former partner, not just business partner, but a former life partner, all those sorts of things where we can add value and listen and deliver a solution. Say, we get you, we're still on the journey with you, here's a mortgage offer.
Which is great because there's a plethora of alternative lenders out there, isn't there, other than the, as you say, the high street banks. So providing a access to those that perhaps just sometimes look at things a little bit out of the box and out of the ordinary.
So the buy-to-let space is what we call the mainstream, which probably would be the high street banks and some of the larger building societies. And then there's an ever-growing group of specialist buy-to-let lenders where we pick up those customers who are a bit more complicated. And my goodness, it is a vibrant space. The constant is change and competition.
Yeah.
We price today much more cheaply than we would have done a year ago. And if a landlord is listening to this in a week or two's time, they'll say, still not cheap enough, Mr. Whittaker. And I'll take that on the chin, but competition is driven by market forces. And, it's a jolly interesting place to be in. It never stands still, that's for sure.
No, I can understand that. So, well, look, let's talk a little bit about you firstly, David. So, because you've had a really fascinating career path from, if I understand correctly, from the Royal Engineers to financial services, and now leading Keystone. So, what are the biggest leadership lessons that carried across from the military into business?
And contrary to what some people may believe, it's the same in industry as it is in business. You've got two of them and one of them. So listen twice as much as you speak, which occasionally you have to sort of button your lip and hear someone out before saying, I don't think that was going to work. But the military taught me is not making a decision is the biggest failure. I hate to bring the words Margaret Thatcher into some people's conversations, but she was a bit like Churchill. They made some really, really good decisions. Thankfully, that outweighed the really, really bad ones they made. But if you reflect on our current seemingly inability to get anything right or be consistent, for God's sake, make a decision and stick with it. Right. And that seems to be a concurrent problem for prime ministers of both Tory stripe and the current stripe in number 10. For goodness sake, stop U-turning. How can, and Simon, you'll see this through your work as a business coach, all we ask for, we may not like it. I need to know where my left guardrail is, and I need to know where my right guardrail is. I may not be pleased about it, but when I know what it is, I can plan and come to a conclusion. And it'll be the same in those other industries that you see, where they're in manufacturing, distribution, professional services. All we ask for is a clear understanding.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. And I love that comment that you made. You know, the worst thing you can do is not make a decision. And yeah, you wouldn't be the first person I've sort of heard that from. Interesting enough, I was speaking to or listening to one of the ex CEOs of, I think, of North America, HSBC, and that was one of the key things that stood out for me. With what she said, exactly that same thing. That the worst thing you can do is not to make a decision. Okay, so when you first launched Keystone back in, I think, 2007, did you always believe it could become one of the leading specialist buy-to-let lenders in the UK, or has the journey evolved beyond what you originally imagined?
So gosh, you've done your research well, Simon. So back in 2007, we were running our brokerage house and we were interfacing with all the lenders. And a very good friend of mine, who was then managing director of mortgages at Paragon Bank, as it now is, a chap called John Heron, he said to me in a moment of frustration at my venting forth my view on their underwriting process, well, David, if you really think that, go and do it yourself. So we did. And we entered into a partnership with the late lamented Bradford and Bingley PLC, because they went from a building society to a PLC. And much is said about their demise 3 years later. And I hasten to add, we're not responsible for their demise. Other things were. I found them the most trustworthy and charming people to deal with. And they funded us, albeit on a constrained basis, to the very last day that they were able to fund themselves. And that gave me an admirable message on management, even in a crisis, that they could have thrown us under the bus, and they chose not to do so. And I retain a very fond memory of Rodriguez and his colleagues on that board there, that whilst everything else went wrong, they dealt in a thoroughly professional and good manner with us. And from that point on, we moved through a couple of other partnerships to the point we got to 2018, which is where we suddenly grew up and pulled the business out of our brokerage business, took new premises, built our own computer systems, and suddenly committed a lot of money to it. But that's probably another question. But that journey was interesting. And over that time, the number of lenders has grown. And there's now 39 lenders offering buy-to-let products to landlords, be they in their own name, partnerships, companies, or what have you. And it's an endlessly fascinating market. So whilst our sales team will compete with the sales team of someone like Lendinvest, who are a great company, they're in fact listed on the market. We all talk to each other behind doors. We work together on industry matters with the regulator. We will share information with each other to help make sure the industry is a better place. And Renters' Rights Act has landed. It's not much different from the Renters' Reform Bill as proposed originally by not even the government. It was always a private member's bill. It's landed. It's just got a little bit more unpleasantness on the outer coating. But actually, once you look through it, you say, it's not a bad thing for the industry. It's just a manner in which sometimes government choose to deliver it because they want to make a political point out there to the public. The fact is, at the end of the day, not much has changed as of the 1st of May, which is when this charming piece of legislation finally landed.
Yeah, absolutely. No, exactly. And as you said earlier, the environment, the market is constantly changing, and the key thing is to stay informed with what happened in any industry, isn't it? To know what's happening in the market. And actually, talking of that, you're known in the industry for telling it like it is. So in in a world full of corporate messaging, why do you think that authenticity matters so much in leadership?
Well, I think I'm in that fortunate position that we are a private company, and along with colleagues and family members, we own this business. When you work for a very esteemed bank, such as One Savings Bank based here in Kent, they're a listed bank. Their distribution director, who's a good friend of mine, he might share the same view as me. But by the time he gets the questions for a panel debate, we're both going to sit on, and his compliance and PR team have been through it, he's left with very little he's allowed to say, because if he says what he really thinks, the share price might go down. Equally, it might go up, but that's not how compliance departments see these sorts of things. So I'm probably able to articulate on behalf of the industry matters that matter to us and to them. And I did a very large conference gathering for something called PMS Club, which is owned by Sesame Bank Hall. That's brokers coming together. And there were 350 of them in the room. And halfway through, the chief executive, who was sitting at the front table, had his head in his hands. But I was just saying, this is how I saw things panning out. And occasionally, you've got to pin your colours to the mast. And I always say to brokers, now clearly much of what I'm saying you may disagree with, and it may be SH1T, but if I'm wrong and you can prove me wrong, at least they go away and do the research.
Yeah.
And because here I am in Kent, if they ever find me out wrong, they get a bottle of Chapel Downs famous sparkling wine, because obviously one should support a Kentish business. And, I do occasionally end up sending a bottle out and say, do you know what, on balance, you're probably more right than I am. So, yep, happy to be corrected on that. But excuse me, it engages the debate. And debate should always be open, shouldn't be hostile, as we seem to do everything in politics. But you can go, hey, I think on balance, I'll bow to you on this particular occasion.
Yeah. And it actually, that reminds me a little bit of the five dysfunctions of a team by sort of Patrick Lencioni, which is a great book. And actually, one of the dysfunctions of a team is the lack of challenge and conflict. So exactly what you've sort of said there. Everyone, it should be debated, it should be discussed, there should be challenge. But in a controlled, not as you say, in an argumentative way, but just questioning and challenging. It's a great thing. It gets people thinking, as you said. So love that. So
we're very lucky. We have a team that we call data analytics.
Yeah.
Actually, it's where we have our AI boys and girls. And I do say boys and girls, because I think their average age is 20 and a half. They've all got double firsts from Exeter and Loughborough and places like this, all the world of artificial intelligence, and they are super, super bright. And says the man who struggles to even log into the Zoom call. And occasionally what they do is they'll go down a rabbit hole on a particular project. You drag them out by the ankles and you say, now look around. Let me paint the environment for you a bit better. Then you let them go off again. And it doesn't make what they were doing wrong, but they got so enthusiastic about the AI functionality they were about to build. And I say, yeah, but that doesn't actually resemble anything that's remotely useful at the end of it, other than the fact you've made something work. And I think part of our responsibility, especially with our younger colleagues, and I watch with dread the statistics, the percentage of kids between 16 to 24 that aren't either in what they call it NEETs, isn't it? Not in active employment, training, or something else. Okay, I think that really worries me.
Yeah. Yes,
I agree. What are we going to do with that next generation? My kids are probably a little bit older than that, and last time I checked, they were allegedly in gainful employment. Whether their employer thinks that is a different matter, but they were working for a living. But our responsibility is to, as you say, challenge these kids. And so this is not about confrontation, it's about having a broadening of the debate. So at the end of it, we're agreed on stuff. And that's kind of my responsibility to sit here in my office, which does have a door in it, because I swear so much, so the door gets closed. But the reality is to encourage their development and find in someone who left school with barely a qualification to their name. And yet one of my team heads was somehow education didn't work for her, but she's one of the brightest, sparkiest, most capable people I've gotten a building full of 135 sparky capable people. And I think it's our responsibility to unlock and liberate that potential, occasionally pull them back, but mostly liberate that potential in those kids.
So, on that note, a lot of founders struggle to let go operationally as a business grows. So how have you approached delegation and building a leadership team around you?
They might well disagree whether I'm capable of letting go of anything, but the reality is employing people who have the potential or perhaps are better than you, and then just harnessing their direction. I've got people here with double first in maths, and mortgages essentially are about maths, and you can make it really quite soup to nuts, and it's trying to let them go. But occasionally they all know, because when this was literally one man and his dog, and I can see my latest dog sitting outside the office giving me evil stares at the moment, she'd rather be outside on a nice day like this, it is, they know, regretfully, I am the person that will dive in and go and look at an individual case and ask the awkward questions. Because actually, the numbers on the mortgage, whilst they matter to the borrower, once you've got the numbers in play, it's about the people behind it. And, in this high-tech day and age, we collate a lot of data in. There's nothing I enjoy more than having a conversation with one of our borrowers, normally with their broker's approval, because we don't like going around brokers, and just talking to them about, as we are talking about, their life, their motivation. Where are you taking this portfolio to? It just helped my mind to know what you're up to. So it is very much a people business. And there's, in this business, there's 110 of us, and there's about 30 in the brokerage house now. I couldn't be over all of it. I'd crash and burn within days if I tried to do that. So you have to learn to trust people. And do you know what? People will always surprise you on the upside. And if something breaks, I'd rather know about it when it's only slightly broken, or when we're heading towards a brick wall at 90 miles an hour. So we always say to people, if something's gone wrong, just tell us sooner rather than later. It's far easier, soonest addressed, soonest repaired.
Yeah, hold your hand up and say, I've made a mistake. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I do every morning, so they just most my colleagues never get to hear about it.
Yeah. So what's been the hardest business decision that you've had to make as a leader, David?
Well, I'm going to take you back to the onset of the credit crunch, which some now call the great financial crisis in 08, 09. So we were running the lending business, and we were then with Bradford and Bingley, but we were all within the brokerage house. There's 120, 130 of us. And the rest of the economy didn't have a crash. It was only the banking sector and the mortgage sector. And we had to let people go on a scale I never thought possible. Mm. And whilst that hurt, and I had a really good operations director, he said, I'll handle this, and I write myself out for a job at the end of it. So I thought that was very brave and courageous of him to do that. But it's when everyone came to my desk as they exited, and I spoke with all of them as we let them go. No one kicked off.
Right.
Everyone said thank you, and we understand. And do you know what? That was emotionally tougher than if someone had stood in front of my desk and stamped their feet and sworn at me, because clearly, perhaps they were the principal breadwinner at home, or the only breadwinner at home. This was a tough time, and they knew that our industry wasn't picking up jobs anytime soon. And that, for me, was probably the toughest, because we had to do it not once, not twice. We had to do it 3 times, and it never seemed to be enough even to be able to survive. Oh. And that really hurt on a personal basis. It took me almost years to shake it off. The toughness of the emotion of losing valued colleagues. I think it goes to respect to people who work in large corporations. If the word comes down for the chief executive office, slim your department down by 20%, you can park the blame upstairs. And I understand that people would, but when there was nowhere else to go above me, it was my gig. And you in your work, Simon, you'll find when you speak to those founder entrepreneurs, it's the one thing that keeps them awake at night, is their responsibility. Well, other than whether the bank might pull their facilities, but it's that overarching responsibility to the people that have joined them on the journey.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that. That is constantly on the mind of most, if not all, of the business owners that I coach. And so, if you could wave a magic wand and solve one challenge in your business right now, what would that be, David?
It's slightly glib, but it's incredibly important. It is a stable swap markets. So
Right.
swap
Yeah.
markets are what we price our mortgage products out of, which are the junior cousins to the bond markets. This is where the government has a current small problem. There has not been a single quarter since March 2020 where something hasn't come in off the radar that has destabilized our ability to price products.
Yeah.
And, if you can't take a joke, you shouldn't join. But as one of the industry magazines commented last month, as we absorbed the oscillations of Trump engaging in conflict in the Middle East, and why wouldn't we all turn out to support him? Well, it's a defense organization, it's not an offensive organization, NATO, things like that. The industry celebrated that the average mortgage product was lasting 8 days, not 8 working days, 8 calendar days. And time was when you would have products out there for 4 to 6 weeks at a time because the markets were stable and you'd price competitively. At the moment, in all of my peer group, the one thing we mutter to each other down the phone was, could I just have 3 months where we can settle everything down? And the benefit of the customers is once you lose the volatility, we can all price closer to the line. When you've got ups and downs like that, you always have to leave a little bit of a buffer. You don't want to be the Nick Leeson of Barings Brothers fames, where you bust the bank on swap rates and not have your money covered. And it's a simple thing to ask for, but my goodness, getting it delivered in this febrile environment that we seem to have suffered one way or the other since March 2020. So we're over 6 years in now. And you'll have other people you work with, Simon, who feel it in different ways, but it's particularly acute in our environment where we get a product priced up, and before we've even pushed the launch button, something's happened in the background. You go, okay, well, we're committed to this now.
The financial markets affect all of us in some way, shape, or form, either directly or indirectly. And what you've sort of explained there is a way that it directly affects your business. And look, there's one question I always like to ask everybody that's kind enough to join me on this discussion, David, and that's what advice would you give to an 18-year-old you? So if you could go back and speak to yourself when you were 18, what would you say to yourself?
Probably get better A-level results than I did at the time. I think I look back on that, especially the 10 years I spent in the armed forces, where I was incredibly lucky to have some fantastic jobs. And I actually ended up working twice, once indirectly, but once directly for the now monarch when he was the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, but now obviously King Charles. And I kind of took it for granted. It kind of went with the territory. All right, I wasn't Brigade of Guards, I was Royal Engineers, as you said, but I first met the King diving on the wreck of the Mary Rose. And we both peered in Southampton Harbour and said, that doesn't look so good. And I said, well, I'll find out in a moment, Your Royal Highness. And I was the next diver in, and I went and had a look. And I worked for Sunday Operation Rally. Those are the sorts of opportunities that you only reflect on afterwards and realize, gosh, how lucky you were to work indirectly for him and report to him on something. And I did a podcast for someone in the mortgage industry about 9 months ago. I said, don't underestimate the soft power of this monarch. I think a lot of people overassume his capabilities as being somewhat benign and not the same as his late mother's. And that speech he delivered in America, we all knew what its contents were. Clearly the man in the White House didn't understand it, and someone's had to paint it out for him in words of one syllable. But I thought, gosh, that was a masterclass in delivering a lecture. To go back to our earlier point about conflict, what a way to get a message across. And I think in business and in industry, you don't quite get those opportunities. So I've got involved in other things like trade bodies and what we call the mortgages board that sits within UK finance to try and add some direction and clear focus. And I am the one that will sit in a successive board meeting and say, ladies and gentlemen, we've still got this on the agenda. We still haven't fixed it. Either we get it off the agenda and accept we can't bring it back for 18 months, or we jolly well resolve it. And it's bringing that clear-sighted direction occasionally to stuff. So to my 18-year-old self, I would say, take any and every opportunity that is put in front of you. And frankly, if it doesn't scare the hell out of you, it's not worth doing. You know, if you look at a job in another business, say, oh, I can do that job, I'll take it.
Yeah.
You've underpitched yourself. You should be going for the grade above, where you arrive there thinking, I can do less than half of this job. The other half of the job, I'm an imposter on, but I'm going to work jolly hard on it. And I think that's the message we try to give to our younger colleagues here, is go for the higher job. And occasionally, 130, 140 years, you lose colleagues, they go on promotion to another firm. And I say to them on the way out the door, does the job scare you? They go, yes. I said, good, but don't let it scare you when you get there. Yeah. And I think we need to sort of drag ourselves up to the opportunity above and not go for mediocre, because otherwise how do we liberate the future entrepreneurs, the future high risers that are going to, as you and I sit in the country pub garden with a glass of nice cool beer in our hands here, how are we going to feel comfortable that we've got the future entrepreneurs and high flyers that are going to see this country to a good economic growth? Forget the politics for a moment. You know, the boys and girls that they're going to do that aren't going to do that unless we inspire and encourage them to really go for gold.
That's brilliant. I love that. There's some great nuggets there of things, that advice that you would give yourself, but also the future generation, and it's them we're going to rely on in the future. So, David, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today and sharing more about your business, but also your journey as well. So, thank you.
Well, Simon, thank you for having me on. And we're a simple business, but it's every business at the end of the day, even if it's highly automated, is a people business, and that's our most valuable resource. And I hope we as a broader company, not just my office, we give our colleagues that opportunity.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more.